My Hero Academy's formula for success in Season 1? Fun, loose tone, solid animation and visuals, characters that are loose enough to feel fun in a world that doesn't appear to take itself too seriously, which is for the best in a battle shonen. What surprised me the most when rewatching was how fun and loose Season 1 was. I'd become so used to the tired and tedious melodrama and bland villains of the later seasons that I'd forgotten what made the first season good. The amount of effort that's put into its visuals and its tone. Like, I couldn't believe All Might swore in Season 1 while rewatching. It made me laugh every time because it was one of the few moments All Might felt human to me. As if his public image was just that, a facade put on for the public, and that he was a different guy when not in front of his fans or the press. You'll also notice there's a lot more effort put into making the visuals engaging. Season 1 is very lighthearted and loose, something that it loses in the later seasons, opting for overly serious villain arcs that fall flat for a myriad of reasons I'll get to later. The production quality and tone become a much bigger problem later, but for now everything seems to be nicely humming along. This applies to the other two big things I wanted to talk about for Season 1, Deku and Shigaraki. Here's a brief overview of what happens in Season 1. My Hero Academy takes place in a world where people can have quirks, which are basically superpowers. 80% of people have them at this point, but our protagonist Deku doesn't. He idolizes All Might, and through a chance encounter ends up inheriting All Might's ability, but he struggles to control it and it tears up his body. Deku enters UA, the school that All Might went to, and begins going through the entrance exams and then begins life as a student. But during a training exercise, a group called the League of Villains, led by the series' primary antagonist Shigaraki, raids the school and attacks the students. They are defeated without any casualties among the students, and Season 1 comes to a close. I have a lot of issues with the way Deku is written, but for Season 1 I think he works fairly well as the protagonist. I like the way the show establishes the traits he possesses that make him the worthy pick to inherit All Might's ability over other, more talented potential vessels. Namely, this scene in Episode 4 that ultimately becomes the deciding factor for All Might choosing it. The problem I have with Deku in Season 1 is that Horikoshi uses him to ask a genuinely compelling question, and then does nothing with it. When Deku first asks All Might, "Can I be a hero too?" it poses an interesting quandary. Can someone without powers be a hero? This question is really interesting and becomes more interesting as you go along, considering basically every major character has a quirk. The only times this theme are brought back up are briefly with Melissa Shield in the first movie, and with Mirio in Season 4, but it never really gets into it in as much detail as you'd like. To solve this, I think it would be neat if One For All had an activation period, where Deku would have to survive entry exams with a barely budding, weak version of One For All, rather than having it be so powerful he can't control it and it injures his body. Because at least then the answer to the question, "Can I be a hero too?" isn't, "Yes, but only if you have powers." After all, the definition of heroism they seem to like going back to after Season 3 is, a hero's job is to turn the lip service into reality. The idea there is that superpowers are not what makes someone a hero. It doesn't really say anything about superpowers. A statement like that, and when you think about how Deku throwing himself at the blob monster to save Bakugo despite having no powers is what convinced All Might to transfer the power to him, it's fair to say that the traits that make someone a superhero rather than just a guy with powers is explicitly unrelated to superpowers. So why aren't there more examples of heroes or villains that don't have powers? People who overcame their handicap and became examples of what a hero can be even without a quirk? They set up Deku like he's going to be that, but then immediately retreat from it and the idea isn't played with again. This plot choice bothers me because it's the first big question My Hero Academy asks its audience, and it doesn't give that plotline enough time to come up with a good answer before basically erasing it from the narrative. It sets itself up to do one thing that's risky and interesting, and then retreats to a safer choice that's more convenient to write around later. When we get to the later seasons, you'll notice My Hero Academy tends to do this a lot. As it's set up, his power damaging his body is an okay way to prevent All For One from being so strong it feels like a cheap way of getting out of having a quirkless protagonist, but as you'll see later, the series doesn't like to stick to it. The last thing in Season 1 I wanted to talk about is Shigaraki. Shiggy is a bit difficult to discuss because Horikoshi's intentions for the character aren't always clear. Is he supposed to be stupid and incompetent? Is he supposed to be brilliant and intimidating? Horikoshi doesn't always make it clear, but like most things in Season 1, Shiggy is pretty simple to judge. After all, when you look at him divorced from the context of later seasons, Shigaraki is either a very, very badly executed attempt at an intimidating, intelligent villain, or a villain that's written to be stupid on purpose at the start so you can see him grow and become more threatening as the series goes along. My take is that he's written dumb on purpose here. His childish tantrum throwing, his empty words and half-baked ideologies that seem to indicate nothing whatsoever is going on upstairs, and the students in All Might repeatedly insulting him seem to point to the show being self-aware of how dumb and childish he is. In this context, how badly the raid goes for Shigaraki makes sense. After all, he's supposed to be a moron here, and the results he gets reflect that. I think maybe you could have had him kill someone to establish him as something of a threat considering this scene makes him look incredibly stupid, but that isn't an issue yet. Overall, Season 1 of My Hero Academy is very solid. Good action, decent characters, and the looser tone lends itself to a much more enjoyable viewing experience compared to later seasons. Season 2 starts off strong with the best arc in the anime, the Sports Festival. Admittedly, a lot of why I like it is because it reminds me of my favorite arc from Naruto, the Chunin exams. Anyways, the Sports Festival is honestly pretty great. Tons of action and drama, a tournament of one-on-one fights, and most importantly, no villains running around to distract Horikoshi. Let's quickly run through the first 2 stages so we can get to the part I like. The first stage is pretty good, but the least interesting stage overall. Deku, Todoroki, and Bakugo dominate this stage, setting things up for the cavalry battle. Groups of 4 fight each other in these weird formations. You need to grab other participants' headbands to get points and pass. The higher you placed in the obstacle course, the more points you're worth in this stage, meaning the bigger target you are to the other students. Deku finished number 1, so he's worth 1 million. The stage is also pretty good, except for this stupid part where some of the students retire from the festival because their memories of it are gone. But where it really gets good is stage 3, the one-on-one tournament. This was the best part of Naruto, and I think it's obvious Horikoshi took heavy inspiration for this arc. In fact, some of the fights are basically copied from Naruto, like how Kirishima vs Tetsu ends in a draw after both contestants knock each other out with punches to the face, aka the same way Sakura vs Ino ends. And Bakugo vs Uraraka is basically Neji vs Hinata, aka female side character that's interested in the main character romantically tries to fight off arguably the strongest student, is inspired by the main character and fights on and on even when they're overwhelmed, and they end up collapsing. I think this part of My Hero Academy outshines the rest of the show for a number of reasons, but the main reason is because it's the most focused Horikoshi has been through the entire first 4 seasons of the show. Horikoshi is able to focus not only on the strengths of what he's created, but also the strengths of the battle shonen genre itself. You have characters informing the action, like Todoroki using his fire powers against Deku, and losing because he refused to use them against Bakugo. The world building is informing the action, like Mei using her fight against Deku as an advertisement for her inventions. And the action is informing the character development, like Yoruzu despairing because she lost so easily, which becomes a plotline going forward. It all comes together at once to create easily the best arc of the show, and also leads to the best fight of the show, Deku vs Todoroki. If I had to compare it to another fight, I'd say this is My Hero Academy's Rock Lee vs Gaara. Deku's ability is actually pretty similar to Rock Lee's, where using their ability damages their body, and overusing it could prevent them from fighting again. And Todoroki has always struck me as My Hero Academy's Gaara. What with his overwhelmingly strong ability, seemingly invincible defense, and how both characters hold back their full strength in every fight thus far, never being pushed enough to use it, which is what makes the 2 fights exhilarating. For the first time, you see someone actually get to them. In both fights, the challenger is forced to overwork their bodies to dangerous degrees to level the playing field, and then, it happens. The thing we were told would never happen, happens. Gaara gets hit and is forced to use his real ability. Todoroki snaps and uses his fire. And this moment, right here, is My Hero Academy's peak. It is the moment where all of its strengths converge into one incredible moment. This moment is great, but it's the last time My Hero Academy reaches anything close to such a high. Enjoy it, because this is where the decline of My Hero Academy begins. After this arc ends, the first signs of a recurring problem the show has yet to solve through Season 4 pops up. Horikoshi declaring stakes and then retreating to a safer option that's easier to ride around. So, this is Class A's chance to show off their stuff for potential internships and hero agencies, as the event is broadcast across the nation, but also tons of scouts are present. If you thrive, everyone will witness it, but the same is true if you fail. It could hurt your reputation going forward. Class A is also threatened with the possibility of being demoted to a lower class if they underperform. This one is interesting, as it adds a lot of pressure to the fights with Class B students. After all, if a Class A student loses to one from Class B, there's a high chance those two will be switching places. The problem with this one is Horikoshi doesn't follow through with it, as only Class A students end up advancing and no one from Class B is promoted. In Naruto, all 3 of the same ninja ended up advancing to the finals of the Chunin exams. I like this because it establishes the strength of the other nations and indicates clearly that they're just as strong as Konoha Gakure and pose a very real threat to it. Which, yeah, turned out to be the case. With My Hero Academy though, that doesn't happen. Now, I'm not saying this is bad because My Hero Academy didn't do what Naruto did in a similar situation. It's bad because My Hero Academy does this constantly, creating stakes for a situation and then retreating from them, which constantly deflates tension and handicaps the potential for viewers to get invested in the drama in later arcs. It's not a huge deal here, but as you'll see when we get to Season 3, it becomes a very large problem the series has yet to solve through the current season. Despite being told many times that Deku is risking his body by using his power the way he does, Deku never actually suffers any long-lasting consequences like permanently damaging his body, or being sidelined for a while so he can actually recover. Quick stop to the hospital and he's good to go next episode. This is, again, not a huge deal now, but if you're going to create that subplot, you have to actually follow through with it somehow eventually, and Horikoshi never does, which again we'll get to in more detail in Season 3. So, the series is riding high after the Sports Festival arc, and I started becoming convinced that My Hero Academia could actually live up to its endless height. After all, Horikoshi and Studio Bones proved capable of drawing out the show's strengths to overpower its weaknesses for one great arc. If they can keep doing that, the series is bound for greatness. But like I said earlier, the decline of the series begins after the Sports Festival arc, and that decline starts with the show's next big villain, Stain. Now, Stain himself is fine. Stain isn't a fan of current hero society. He believes that hero is a title that only should be bestowed upon those who accomplish good deeds. He thinks that the world has become overgrown with fake heroes, and that greed and fame have tainted what it means to be a hero. First time I watched Season 2, I was confused by Stain and didn't understand what statement Horikoshi was trying to make with this arc, but couldn't really put a finger on why. On rewatch though, this line made me realize why Stain felt off.
Hero とは偉業を成した者のみ許される称号多すぎるんだよ英雄気取りの背筋主義者が
Okay, now think. How many heroes can you think of that fit that description? How many heroes have we seen that are greedy, that will take bribes, that are willing to compromise their beliefs for money, or became corrupted by money? That's right. There aren't any. And this is why Stain as a villain doesn't work. None of the heroes of My Hero Academia align with the way Stain sees the world. His reasoning makes sense, but it's rather difficult to think of any that represent why what he's saying is a bad thing. All the heroes in My Hero Academia are too morally upstanding to reflect Stain's criticisms of society. The worst hero I can think of in terms of behavior is Endeavor, and he's the worst by a lot. He definitely checks the box for being overly obsessed with fame via aiming for the #1 spot, but at the same time he's the only example of this. Ideally, you want your villain's criticism of society to be something that resonates, where you look everywhere and see it. With Stain, you have to squint to find any examples of what he's talking about. The only characters that come close to validating Stain's claims are Uraraka and Mount Lady. Uraraka's motivation to become a hero is to make money, making her the only hero to have the motivation Stain is criticizing. And in her case, the money isn't even for her, it's for her parents. She wants money to take care of her parents, which hardly sounds like money worshipping and doesn't stand to prove what Stain said correct. As for Mount Lady, there are several instances of her acting like a jackass, but these scenes don't seem to be written in a way that criticizes her behavior. A lot of them are presented as though her behavior is charming, and in many cases they're comedic as well. And if Horikoshi is trying to say fame chasing and the over-commercialization of heroes is bad here, then that message is contradicted by this moment in Season 4, when Deku wins over Night Eye because he knew some absurdly specific fact about an All Might poster. I thought it was supposed to be a bad thing. And just generally, quite a bit of Hero Society feels over-commercialized, but like with Mount Lady, it isn't clear that the show is self-aware about it. You can definitely look at these seeds and think, her priorities don't seem to be in order, or, well, that sounds like an unhealthy mindset that's bound to cause problems if it goes unchecked. But the show isn't conveying that to the viewer due to how it's executed. It's always played straight or comedically, which indicates it isn't portraying these behaviors as problematic. And when you think they might go that route, the show comes short of doing anything with it. So for money chasing, you have one example that sort of works, and another that completely contradicts it. Not exactly an ideology that resonates strongly. Stain's problem is that not enough effort was put into making his claims about society ring true. The show isn't consistent in how it treats fame worshipping and over-commercialization, and there aren't enough examples of either problem in the show for either issue to feel systemic rather than isolated. And before you dismiss this as nitpicking, this particular issue is something other good battle shonens don't usually have a problem with. There's a reason you feel some empathy for Scar in Fullmetal Alchemist, because we know exactly why he's attacking state alchemists, and we know that there are bastards in the military that enjoyed slaughtering his people, the Ishbalans. Beyond just that, thousands of other officers like Roy Mustang turned the other cheek or didn't take a stand. In a way, they're all guilty and deserve to be punished. Point being, we know what Scar believes and understand why he believes it because what he opposes is systemic in the world he inhabits. This just isn't the case for My Hero Academy. Stain is effectively opposing a straw man, a non-existent class of greedy heroes that we as an audience aren't shown. As such, his words ring hollow. There's potential here, but you have to be willing to take risks like making more heroes less than perfect. Endeavor was a good start, but you need more if you want a villain like Stain to work. With all this in mind, it's no surprise that Deku's takeaways from this encounter are nonsense.
あんな最後見せられたら生きてるのが奇跡だって思っちゃうね。僕の足、これ多分殺そうと思えば殺せてたと思うんだ。
ああ、俺らはあからさまに生かされた。
Why is that? Stain left everyone alive. He failed to kill anyone. This ties into another issue I have with Horikoshi refusing to kill heroes, which I'll get to in Season 3. I don't want to dig too deep into this particular issue yet, so for now let's move on to Deku's other takeaway.
俺も血を舐められてなんかいなかった。なのに、あの場であの一瞬、ヒーロー殺しだけが確かに相手に立ち向かっていた。
Deku did that when he approached Stain in the alley? Deku's body moving on its own is one of his signature personality traits. It's the thing that convinced All Might to pass one for all to him. So Stain having the courage or resolve to stand against his opponents isn't something Deku can or needs to internalize. It is his signature strength. Ideally, you want the main character to learn a lesson that they needed to at the end of an arc. They acquire some knowledge or learn something that changes them. This one is half-assed and isn't relevant to the character's growth. Him being unafraid to stand against his opponents is literally his greatest strength. His takeaway from this encounter with Stain is meaningless. He already does that same thing, more so than any other hero. He's always done it. It's nonsense. Deku not taking anything away from this arc due to Horikoshi's bad writing ties into another problem the show has. Deku is the main character. And yes, I did say I liked him as the protagonist in Season 1, but that's only in the context of Season 1, ignoring the rest of the series. Now, there are things I like about his character, like his thing where his body moves without thinking, and the way he inspires change in people reminds me a bit of the way Naruto does the same thing. But like in terms of him as a person, he isn't very good. There isn't much to him as a person after he gets One for All. They spend more time developing his powers than him as a character, and he has very weak interpersonal relationships with the rest of the characters except for All Might. But the problem I wanted to cover relative to Stain is that he doesn't believe in anything. As you could probably guess, I have an issue with Deku's belief system. That is to say, there isn't one. And no, doing bad things is bad. You should always try your best, and never give up do not count. I think Deku is most similar to Naruto as a protagonist, so that'll be the comparison I use to illustrate my point. In Naruto, it is obvious what the writer identifies as the bad parts of the shinobi world. It is war. The event that caused Naruto's parents to die was an act of war, an attack by Tobi to get the Nine Tails to attack the Leaf Village. Most of the villains are in some way raised by war, or the circumstances they currently face are the result of it. Haku was an orphan due to an ability he inherited from his mother. Due to a war prior to Haku's birth, many in his clan hated and feared this ability due to its association with the war and the fear that its existence would mean more war. These circumstances resulted in Haku's entire clan being wiped out except for him. He is now an orphan as a result of war. The same is true of Zaku later. He was taken in by Orochimaru after being found on the streets, and ultimately, Zaku was sacrificed as a means of another attack, the Konoha Crush. Neji's belief system of people being unable to change their fate is a result of his father's death, which was a cover-up to protect the family after a Kumo Gakure head ninja visiting Konoha took advantage of a peace treaty and attempted to kidnap Hinata in order to gain the secrets of the Byakugan. Nagato ended up as an orphan after his parents were killed by shinobi from the Leaf Village, and was forced to leave his village and search for food and shelter after killing those shinobi. After nearly collapsing from hunger, he met Konan and Yahiko, orphans like himself. They shared dreams of a future where they were in charge and could use their power to eliminate war. This group became known as the Akatsuki. They grew in numbers, blah blah blah, and eventually the leader of Amagakure, Hanzo of the Salamander, felt threatened. Hanzo pretended he would work with the Akatsuki so that he could ambush Yahiko and Nagato, with support from Konoha's Danzo. Some shit went down, Yahiko dies, and Nagato severs all ties with Amagakure. Yahiko's death ultimately convinced Nagato that his philosophies about achieving peace were foolish. The world would never willingly end the cycle of death and hatred it had operated on for so long. Only through direct experience of war and all the losses and agonies it brought could anyone truly desire peace. The scars of war inflicted on many characters throughout Naruto, and Naruto himself embodies the things that the shinobi world needs to change, such as a willingness to forgive those who don't deserve forgiveness, and compassion even towards your enemies. The fact that Deku doesn't have a similar level of depth is for a lot of reasons, but a large part of it is that the villains lack an ideology that is followed up and or informed by the world around them. Deku doesn't represent a change needed in Hero Society. He just wants to be like All Might. The villains all say there are problems with Hero Society, but none of them actually have a point. When you look at what Pain says about continuing the cycle of death and hate, you understand what he's talking about, because you've seen it in tons of characters. Naruto having to live in a village that hates him for something he can't control, and having to grow up alone because his parents were killed during his birth. Sasuke's entire clan was wiped out. His entire existence is based around getting revenge and killing the person responsible. Tons and tons of examples. And when I examined My Hero Academy's world in a similar way based on Stan's ideology, there's very little there. The things that the villains claim are just that. Things that Horikoshi wrote for them. They aren't based on anything Horikoshi worked into My Hero Academy's world. As a result of all this, the villain arcs of My Hero Academy feel hollow. The pieces are there, But by not having opponents or a world that challenge the protagonist as a person, there isn't that emotional core they need. I really wish Horikoshi would just change his approach to writing villains to something more simple, as he never puts in enough effort to make a villain like Stain work. Or alternatively, write a villain based around your protagonist. Remember when Deku didn't have a quirk at the beginning of the series and it frustrated him to no end? Write a villain around that. You could very easily write villains that abuse their powers and don't appreciate what they have. That's something that would naturally infuriate Deku given he knows what it's like to not have a quirk at all. I thought this is what he was going to do with Overhaul, but the show never touches on the idea. Before I go further, I'd like to clarify this so my point doesn't get misconstrued. Stain isn't bad because he isn't Scar, and Deku isn't bad because he isn't Naruto. Stain doesn't work because he requires the world to be written in a certain way, and Horikoshi's failure to do so has a negative impact on Deku's potential development, and that impact is best illustrated by other, more effective protagonists like Naruto, and better villains like Scar. That's about all I have to say for Season 2. It's harder to judge than Season 1 because half of it is great and the other half is sloppy. Overall though, I think it's decent and has yet to hit truly bad. The next part is Season 3, which is where it starts to be truly bad. See you there.